On the morning of our 42nd wedding anniversary, something inside me finally cracked. Not from anger, not from shock, just exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones after years of being unheard, unseen, and unappreciated. I had spent the entire morning preparing a simple breakfast, nothing extravagant, just something warm to start the day. Eggs, toast, his favorite tea. After 4 decades of marriage, small gestures were all I had left to offer, but even those, it seemed, had become invisible to him. He walked into the kitchen, barely glanced at me, and sighed dramatically when he saw the table. "That's it?" he muttered. "My God, sometimes I wonder why I bother. You've become such a burden, you know that?" A burden. That word didn't come out like a slip of the tongue. It came out like a truth he'd been waiting years to spit out. I didn't drop the plate in my hands. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there, frozen, while decades of memories tightened around my throat like a rope. A burden. That's what I was to him? After everything I had carried, alone, in silence? After everything I protected him from? It was strange his insult didn't sting like I expected. Instead, something inside me unlocked. Something old, something raw, something I had buried so deep I almost forgot it existed. That secret. My secret. The one I hid for 42 years. He had no idea how close he stood to the truth, how fragile his pride was, how much of our life was built on something he didn't even know. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years I didn't see the man I once loved. I saw the man he had become, or maybe the man he always was, entitled, ungrateful, blind to everything except himself. He didn't notice the shift in my eyes. He didn't notice my hands stop shaking. He just picked up his tea, frowned at the temperature, and said under his breath, "Useless, useless." He didn't know that word was the key that unlocked 42 years of silence. I stepped back, leaned on the counter, and let the weight of the moment settle. The kitchen felt smaller, the walls tighter, the air heavier, but inside my chest, something felt lighter, freer. Like I was finally standing in my own story instead of living inside his. He kept rambling, complaining about the tea, the weather, his job, completely unaware of the storm building inside the woman standing 3 feet away from him. I watched him, and memories came flooding back. Nights he slept peacefully while I fought battles he never even knew existed. Years I carried responsibilities he assumed magically solved themselves. Decades of sacrifices I made in silence so his ego could remain intact. He thought he held this marriage together. He thought he provided. He thought he built our life. He had no idea. And that's when the thought came to me, sharp, calm, and unmistakably clear. Done. Not with the marriage, not with the day, but with the silence. If he wanted to call me a burden, then he deserved to know exactly what and who carried him for 42 years. He turned toward me finally, annoyed by my quietness. "What now?" he snapped. I wiped my hands slowly on a towel and said in a voice so steady it startled even me, "Sit down. There's something you should have known a long time ago." He frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" I met his eyes, and for the first time, he looked the slightest bit unsure. "It's time," I said softly. "Time you hear the truth I protected, the truth I shielded him from, the truth that carried our entire marriage on its back, the secret I hid for 42 years. Before I tell you the secret, I need you to understand the beginning, the part of my life where the silence first took root, because secrets don't just appear out of nowhere. They grow in spaces where voices are ignored, and fears feel safer hidden than spoken. I married Thomas when I was just 20. He was charming back then, or at least I mistook confidence for charm. He had that kind of presence that filled a room, loud and unwavering. People gravitated toward him. Meanwhile, I was quiet, soft-spoken, the girl who apologized when someone else bumped into me. Opposites attract, or so they say. But sometimes opposites don't attract, they imbalance. In the early years of our marriage, I mistook his dominance for strength. I told myself I needed someone like him, someone decisive, someone who made decisions quickly because I was too gentle to fight back. And in that belief, I made a mistake that so many young wives make. I stopped choosing myself. I became the supporter, the listener, the emotional sponge. He became the decision maker, the critic, the center of everything. At first, I accepted it. I wanted peace more than I wanted fairness. When we had children, I stayed home longer than planned. Not because I didn't want to work, but because Thomas insisted that his job mattered more, that he earned the real income. Words like that carve deeper than anyone realizes. During our marriage, people often saw us as the successful couple. He loved the spotlight, his promotions, his social circles, his endless stories about how hard he worked. Meanwhile, I was the steady background figure, the wife who kept the house running, who raised the children, who sacrificed time, dreams, and sleep to keep everyone afloat. But here's the part no one sees from outside a marriage. It's not the loud moments that break you, it's the quiet ones. The moments where your opinions are brushed aside, the moments your efforts aren't acknowledged, the moments your exhaustion is dismissed as complaining. Over the years, Thomas grew more comfortable, and I grew more invisible. He liked control. I didn't argue, at least not out loud. And when something catastrophic happened 42 years ago, something that should have woken him up, Thomas didn't step in to help. He didn't protect our family. He didn't sacrifice anything. I did. Silently. Completely. Without telling him. I covered something he should have faced. I saved something he should have saved. And I carried a truth that reshaped every day of our marriage. He never knew. He never asked. He never cared enough to look beyond himself. Until the morning he called me a burden and finally gave me a reason to speak. People think betrayal is a single moment, one blow, one sentence, one mistake. But real betrayal, the kind that eats through bone and memory, is built slowly. Piece by piece, day after day, year after year. And mine started long before the morning he called me a burden. It began with little cracks. The first time he dismissed my ideas about our home. The first time he told me I was lucky he worked so hard. The first time he credited himself for something I had done. The first time he told me I didn't understand real stress. Each time I swallowed the sting, told myself he didn't mean it, told myself marriage was compromise. But compromise only works when both people participate. Thomas didn't compromise. He took. He took my time, my emotional labor, my dreams, my peace, all while believing my sacrifices were simply obligations. He grew so used to being centered that he didn't notice the weight he was placing on me. Then came the children. Motherhood made me stronger, but it also made me easier for him to overlook. Everything I did became expected, normal, invisible. But the true betrayal, the one that forged my secret, happened 42 years ago, 2 months after our wedding. It was the night everything fell apart. We were young, working class, struggling. Thomas had just lost a job because of a mistake. He made a mistake he blamed on everyone but himself. We were drowning in bills. Rent was late. Electricity overdue. I was terrified, but he acted like it wasn't his problem. "It'll work out," he said, shrugging like a man who always assumed someone would rescue him. Someone did. Me. But he never knew how. He didn't know the job I secretly took, the nights I didn't sleep, the danger I stepped into, the promise I made and kept to protect our future, the shame I carried because I didn't want him to know how close we came to losing everything. That night, when I came home exhausted, shaking, and nearly sick from panic, he didn't even notice. He was on the couch, feet up, drinking a beer, complaining about his bad luck. And when I told him gently that I was scared about the bills, he looked at me with that same dismissive expression he still wears today and said, "Stop worrying. You're being dramatic." That was the night I realized something important. If anything was going to get done, if anything was going to be saved, I would have to be the one to do it. He wasn't a partner. I was carrying him and he didn't even know it. Years went by and my secret grew heavier. Not because it was shameful, but because it reminded me of who he wasn't, of who I had to become in his place. And every year he took more credit for the life I held together. The resentment sharpened quietly under my ribs. And then, on our 42nd anniversary, the betrayal finally surfaced. Not in some dramatic explosion, not in a fight, not in an argument, but in one sentence. Sometimes I wonder why I'm still doing all the work. You've become such a burden. That was the moment it all connected. He had spent our entire marriage believing he was the one carrying me, carrying us, carrying our life. But he was hanging his weight on a rope he never tied. A rope I tied, I held, and I nearly broke my hands holding for 42 years. So when he said that word, burden, something inside me shifted from hurt to clarity, to resolve. He didn't deserve the protection I gave him. He deserved the truth. And for the first time, I was ready to speak it. After he called me a burden, the memories I had kept buried for years rose like smoke in a closed room, thick, choking, impossible to ignore. Not memories of love, not memories of partnership, but memories of every battle I fought alone while he slept peacefully beside me. People assume struggle looks loud, tears, shouting, slam doors. Mine wasn't. My struggle was quiet, invisible, made of sacrifices no one applauded. When Thomas lost that first job 42 years ago, I became the gravity that kept our life from collapsing. But he never knew the truth of how close we came to losing everything. He didn't know how many nights I walked home in the cold after working a shift he thought I didn't need. He didn't know I hid the eviction notices so he wouldn't spiral and make everything worse. He didn't know I pawned the necklace my grandmother left me, the only heirloom I had, just so we could make rent. He only knew that things worked out. As if miracles happened for people who sat on couches complaining. I swallowed my fear, buried my pride, and pushed through exhaustion so deep I sometimes fell asleep sitting upright. But I did it because I believed in us. I believed that if I held things together long enough, he would grow into the man I thought I married. Instead, he grew comfortable. Too comfortable. He took my silence as stability. He took my sacrifices as expectation. He took my effort as something that just magically happened. While he slept, I worked. While he spent, I saved. While he complained, I strategized. While he let life happen to him, I fought it tooth and nail, and he never once asked, "Are you okay?" Not when I was working double shifts. Not when I was raising infants while juggling bills. Not when I stayed up until sunrise calculating our budget. Not when I hid letters from loan sharks after his gambling phase, a phase he barely remembers but I still lose sleep over. I remember one night vividly. The electricity had been cut off, and our children were still young. They were scared of the dark, and I didn't want them to think we were failing, so I turned it into a fun camping night, pretending it was planned. But the truth? He had spent money we didn't have on a night out with friends. He walked through the door reeking of alcohol, laughing, while I sat in the dark pretending to be strong. He looked around and asked, "Why are the lights off?" "Power outage." I lied. He shrugged, kissed our sleeping kids, and said, "Good thing I provide, huh?" I wanted to scream, but instead, I smiled, because screaming never changed him. Years passed, decades passed. Thomas built a reputation, a hard-working man, a devoted father, a provider. People admired him. They never knew the truth. I was the provider. I was the safety net. I was the invisible backbone of our life. And through all of that, he never thanked me. Not once. Instead, he criticized. He minimized. He took. So when he called me a burden, it didn't just hurt, it clarified everything. He had no idea who he was talking to. He had no idea what I saved him from. He had no idea how many disasters I prevented without ever asking for credit. But he was about to. Because the secret I kept wasn't small. It wasn't petty. It wasn't emotional. It was a truth that would shatter the image he spent 42 years building, an image made of lies, assumptions, and the comfort of ignorance. He thought he carried the family. I was the one carrying him. And now, he was finally going to see it. After that morning, after the insult that sliced through 4 decades of silence, I stopped moving like a wife trying to keep peace. I moved like a woman preparing for truth. Thomas didn't notice. He never noticed anything unless it concerned him. He left the house that afternoon to clear his head, as if he were the one suffering. I watched him drive away without saying a word, my hands steady for the first time in years. There was no panic, no guilt, no trembling, just resolve. The secret I had guarded for 42 years wasn't something I could throw at him in anger. It deserved clarity. It deserved power. It deserved witnesses. So I walked to the back of our bedroom, knelt beside the old cedar chest I hadn't opened since our children were teenagers, and lifted the heavy lid. The smell of old paper, dust, and forgotten years rose up like a ghost. Inside were the things I had hidden to protect him. Letters from collection agencies, bank statements with overdraft notices, payment receipts from the 3 jobs I worked in secret, the legal document he never knew existed, and the letter that started it all. I stared at that letter for a long moment, the letter that carried the truth he never earned. Then I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. When she answered, her voice was older but still sharp. "You finally ready?" she said. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm ready." My older sister, Ruth, the only person alive who knew my secret, the one who helped me hide everything all those years ago, exhaled hard, almost like she'd been waiting decades to hear those words. "I'll be there in an hour." The weight in my chest loosened, not because she was coming, but because someone finally stood beside me, someone who'd seen the worst nights of my marriage and never judged me for staying. While I waited, I laid everything out on the bed. 42 years of evidence. 42 years of silence. 42 years of carrying a man who believed he carried me. When Ruth arrived, she took one look at the papers and shook her head. "You protected him too long," she said. "He should have known the truth years ago." "I know," I whispered. "But I couldn't risk the kids thinking less of him. They were too young." "And now?" she asked. "Now they're grown," I said. "And I'm done living like a ghost in my own life." Ruth smiled, sad, proud, fierce. "Then let's end it." We spread out the documents. The night I saved us from eviction, the loans I paid off under his name, the debts he didn't even remember making, the second job I worked in secret when the kids were babies, the savings account he never knew existed, and the truth about how our entire financial stability, the house, the cars, his so-called provider reputation, came from one thing I did that changed everything forever. The thing he spent 42 years bragging about as his accomplishment was never his. We put everything in a folder. Thick, heavy, unignorable. "Are you sure you're ready to tell him?" Ruth asked. I looked her in the eyes, the only eyes that had ever seen my quiet suffering, and said, "He called me a burden, Ruth. He thinks he built this life. He thinks he carried this family. He thinks I owe him something." I lifted the folder. "This is the truth, and it's time he finally sees it." Ruth nodded. "He won't recover from this." "I'm not trying to hurt him," I said softly. "I'm trying to free myself." As we drove toward our children's house where I knew the confrontation had to happen, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Strength, calm, readiness. The truth didn't scare me anymore, but it was about to terrify him. When Ruth and I arrived at our daughter Lily's house, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not the kind that comes from peace, no. This was the stillness before a storm. The kind your body gives you when it knows something irreversible is about to happen. I called my children earlier and asked them to gather. I didn't tell them why. I just said, "It's important." They heard something in my voice, something I'd never allowed them to hear, and they came without question. When Thomas walked through the door, he looked irritated, confused. and slightly offended his usual reaction when he wasn't the one in control. "What is this?" he snapped. "Why is everyone here? I don't have time for this drama." Drama. He still thought I was the problem. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply pulled out the thick folder from my bag and placed it on the table. "We're here," I said steadily, "because you called me a burden, and after 42 years, I think you deserve to know the truth." His eyebrows knitted together. "What truth? That you overreact to everything? That—" "Sit down, Dad," Lily said sharply. He froze. Our children rarely took my side openly. This time they felt the shift. He sat. I opened the folder and slid the first item toward him, the eviction notice from 42 years ago. His face paled. "What is this?" he muttered. "The night you said stop worrying, everything will work out." "We were 3 days from being thrown out of our home," I said. "I worked nights to pay it off. You never knew because I didn't want the children to suffer." I slid the next paper, a loan payment made in his name. "And this?" I continued. "Your gambling debt. I paid it. Alone." His eyes widened. He shook his head. "That's not— I didn't— You don't remember because you were drunk," I said softly. "But I remember every detail." The room grew still. I placed more papers, job stubs from the secret night shifts, bank statements from savings accounts I created, receipts, letters, every silent battle I fought while he slept. "You always bragged that you provided," I whispered. "But the truth is, it was me. I saved our family. I kept us afloat. I carried everything you thought you carried." He stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. His confidence drained from his face, replaced by confusion, then guilt, then something that looked frighteningly like fear. "And this," I said, pulling out the final envelope, "is the part I hid the longest." I handed it to him. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was the legal record from the year we bought our house, showing I was the one who paid the down payment. Not with our money, not with his money, but with the inheritance my mother left me. Money I never told him about because he would have spent it like everything else. "This house," I said quietly, "the one you brag about, you didn't buy it, I did. With money I protected from you because I knew you couldn't handle it." He looked up at me, eyes wet, completely broken. Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered shakily. Everyone in the room held their breath as I answered, "Because you would have ruined it. Because you never listened. Because I was trying to protect our family from you." Silence. Pure, heavy, devastating silence. For the first time in 42 years, Thomas saw me. Not the quiet wife, not the woman he dismissed, not the burden. He saw the truth. He saw the strength. He saw the woman who carried him his entire life, and he realized he had no idea who he was married to. For a long moment after the truth settled over the room, nobody spoke. Not my children, not my sister, not my husband, especially not my husband. He sat there staring at the papers in front of him, like the life he thought he built was dissolving into dust right under his fingers. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind, every memory, every assumption, every boast, every moment of misplaced pride rewinding itself in real time. He finally whispered, I didn't know." "I know," I said gently, "because you never asked." His shoulders caved in at those words like the foundation he had stood on for decades had been pulled out from beneath him. For the first time in our marriage, he looked small. Not weak, not pathetic, just human. Our son Michael broke the silence. "Mom, why didn't you tell us any of this?" I didn't expect the question to hurt as much as it did. "Because I wanted you to grow up loving your father," I said softly. "I didn't want you to see the cracks I spent years patching. You were children. You deserved peace." Lily nodded, tears in her eyes. "You shouldn't have suffered alone." "I thought I was protecting you," I said, "but maybe I was also hiding from the truth I didn't want to face. My truth was simple. I had raised everyone, even my husband. And now, I was tired. Thomas rubbed his face with both hands, overwhelmed. I'm so sorry. I never meant. Don't apologize because you were caught, I said quietly. Apologize because you're finally seeing the truth. He dropped his gaze. He didn't argue. He didn't deflect. He didn't blame me a first in 42 years. I want to fix this, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head slowly. No, fixing things isn't about grand gestures. It's about changing who you are. It's about accountability. It's about listening. He looked at me, silently pleading for another chance. But I wasn't the woman who accepted crumbs anymore. I'm not asking for a divorce, I said calmly. I'm asking for space, for respect, for effort you've never given. For the first time, I want you to carry yourself. My children glanced at each other. They had never seen me speak like this. Strong, still, unshaken. Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder. You did the hardest thing today. I nodded. I did the necessary thing. Later that night, when everyone left, I walked to our bedroom and packed a small suitcase. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I needed distance. Time. Air that didn't feel filtered through 40 years of silence. Thomas stood in the doorway, voice trembling. Where will you go? To my sister's for now, I said. I need to remember who I am when I'm not carrying you. Tears filled his eyes, but I wasn't cruel. I didn't weaponize my pain. I simply stepped into my own life for the first time. As I walked out, I felt a strange, powerful sense of peace. Not freedom from him, freedom from the version of myself who believed being silent was noble. My secret no longer belonged to me alone. My strength no longer lived in the shadows. And for the first time in 42 years, I wasn't a burden. I wasn't an afterthought. I wasn't invisible. I was a woman who survived more than anyone ever knew, and I finally allowed myself to be seen. So let me ask you this. Have you ever carried something so heavy that the moment you finally spoke it out loud, you realized it was never your weight to bear?